Cryptids. The stuff of legends, whispers in the dark, and nightmares made flesh. But what happens when myths claw their way into reality? Welcome to the stories you'll wish weren't real. I need to warn everyone about what's really living in the caves near Dover. The original demon sightings were just the beginning. I've been a cave explorer for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what we encountered in those Massachusetts caves. The memory of those glowing eyes still haunts my dreams, and the sound of bones cracking echoes in my mind during quiet moments. I'm writing this now because people need to know the truth about what happened to my friends, and why the Dover demon isn't just some cryptid legend from the 70s. My name is Baxter Lee, and I led the 4-person team into the newly discovered cave system near Dover. James Morrigan, our geology expert, had been tracking local seismic activity that revealed these hidden caverns. Ranaka Patel, our mapping specialist, brought years of experience documenting unexplored cave systems. Then there was Dave Cooper, a local guide who knew these woods better than anyone. He'd been the one to actually find the cave entrance, hidden behind thick undergrowth on private property. We started our descent on October 12th, a cold morning with frost still clinging to the cave mouth. The entrance was tight, barely wide enough for our gear. Dave went first, then Monica, me, and James bringing up the rear. The limestone walls were slick with moisture, and our headlamps cast long shadows that danced as we moved deeper into the earth. "This formation shouldn't exist here," James muttered, running his gloved hand along the wall. "The geological composition doesn't match anything else in the region." He pulled out his sample kit, but I urged him to wait. We needed to map the main passages first. Monica was already working, marking our path with sophisticated GPS equipment that could penetrate the rock above us. "The signal's weird," she said, frowning at her tablet. "It keeps showing impossible depths, then jumping back to normal readings." That should have been our first warning. The cavern opened up after about 30 minutes of careful descent. The ceiling soared at least 40 feet above us, and our lights couldn't reach the far walls. The air was different here. Stale, with an odd metallic taste that made me want to spit. "Look at this," Dave called out, his voice echoing. He was examining something on the ground near a fallen boulder. As we approached, I saw what had caught his attention. Claw marks, deep gouges in solid rock. "Mountain lion," Monica suggested, but James shook his head. "These are fresh, and they're going up the wall. What kind of animal climbs sheer rock faces in total darkness?" Dave's headlamp suddenly flickered, then died. As he reached for his backup, we heard it, a soft scraping sound from somewhere above us. I aimed my light toward the ceiling, and that's when my heart stopped. 2 pale, luminous eyes stared back at us. The creature moved faster than anything I've ever seen. It dropped from the ceiling, a skeletal, humanoid thing with skin like wet paper. Dave screamed as it landed on him, its elongated fingers wrapping around his torso. Before any of us could react, it was dragging him up the wall, his boots scraping against the rock face. "Dave." Monica fired her flare gun, but the creature had already disappeared into a high crevice with our friend. His screams echoed through the chamber, growing fainter until they stopped altogether. James grabbed my arm. "We have to get out of here. We can't leave Dave." I started climbing toward the crevice, but Monica pulled me back. "Listen." The scraping sounds were all around us now. More pairs of eyes opened in the darkness. 3, 4, 5 sets. They had been hunting us the whole time. We ran. The caves became a maze of twisted passages, and our panic made every turn feel wrong. Monica's mapping equipment was useless now, the readings completely scrambled. Behind us, we could hear them moving through the tunnels, sometimes above us, sometimes beside us in adjacent passages. We found the first body an hour later. It was ancient, mostly skeleton, but the tattered remains of modern climbing gear told us this person had died within the last decade. As we moved deeper, we found more. So many more. Some were recent enough that I had to look away. "They're hurting us," James whispered as we huddled in a small alcove. "Every time we try to backtrack, they force us deeper." He was right. We were being driven further underground toward something. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. Monica's nose started bleeding, and James complained of severe headaches. The deeper we went, the more the creature seemed to change, becoming larger, more aggressive. The attack came as we crossed an underground stream. One of them burst from the water, grabbing my leg and pulling me under. The water was ink black and freezing. I could feel its claws digging into my calf as it dragged me deeper. My lungs were burning when Monica's backup flare illuminated the water, driving the creature back. James helped pull me out, but my leg was mangled. We could hear them closing in again, clicking and scraping along the walls. That's when Monica noticed the fault line. "The whole chamber is unstable," she said, pointing to a massive crack running along the ceiling. "If we can trigger a collapse." It was our only chance. We used our remaining flares and some climbing gear to improvise explosive charges, setting them along the weakest points James could identify. The creatures seemed to sense what we were doing. They became more aggressive, bolder. One of them caught James across the back, leaving deep gashes that went to the bone. When we triggered the charges, the cave's collapse was more violent than we expected. The floor dropped away beneath us, and walls of rock came down like curtains. I lost sight of Monica in the chaos. James and I barely made it through a narrow passage before it sealed behind us, crushing one of the creatures that had been pursuing us. It took us 6 hours to find our way back to the surface. Monica emerged from another exit 2 miles away. Dave's body was never recovered. The official report calls it a cave-in, with Dave listed as missing, presumed dead. They sealed all known entrances to the cave system, but I know that won't hold them. Sometimes at night I think about those other bodies we found, and I wonder how long the Dover demon and its kind have been down there, slowly expanding their labyrinth, waiting for more victims to wander into their domain. I know one thing for certain. They're still hungry, and they're getting closer to the surface. I'm a land surveyor who found a buried diary in the woods. The entries are changing as I read them. The thing about finding a diary buried in the woods is that it's either a hoax or something you really shouldn't have found. I've been a land surveyor for 12 years and I've seen my share of weird stuff out in the field, but nothing prepared me for what happened at the Miller property. Now I understand why the previous 3 surveyors quit before finishing the job. I should have been the 4th. My name's Sebastian Ching, and I've built my reputation on taking the jobs nobody else wants. Remote locations, disputed territories, properties with difficult owners. I've handled them all. So when Carson Associates called me about an abandoned 50-acre plot that needed urgent assessment for development, I didn't think twice about accepting. The pay was good, and they were even throwing in a camper for the week-long survey since the nearest motel was 2 hours away. Just be careful out there. Sophie from the office had said, her usual professional tone wavering slightly. The previous surveyors, well, they all left rather abruptly. Personal reasons, they said. I should have asked more questions. The property was exactly what you'd expect. Overgrown, forgotten, with a dilapidated farmhouse slouching in the center like a drunk trying not to fall over. The previous owner, Gerald Miller, had disappeared 3 years ago, leaving behind a mess of debt and property taxes. Pretty standard stuff. I spent the first day setting up grid markers and taking initial measurements. It was tedious work, but I didn't mind. The woods were peaceful, filled with the usual forest sounds. Birds, rustling leaves, distant water running somewhere. But as the sun started to set, the sounds changed. The birds went quiet. Too quiet. That's when I found the diary. My survey stake hit something metallic about 8 inches down. Curious, I dug it up and found a rusty metal box, about the size of a hardback book. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow but surprisingly well preserved. The first entry was dated April 15th, 2020. Something's been watching me from the trees. At first I thought it was just paranoia, but I've seen it now. Pale humanoid, but wrong. All wrong. The way it moves. Like a person trying to remember how to walk. The police won't help. They think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But the animals. Oh God, the animals. I should have put it back. Should have reburied it and left. But I kept reading, telling myself it was just some creative writing project or the ramblings of the missing owner. The entries got worse. Detailed descriptions of mutilated deer found on the property. Scratching sounds at night. A creature that stood on 2 legs but moved like it had too many joints. That first night in the camper, I convinced myself the scratching on the walls was just tree branches. The whispers that sounded like my sister calling my name? Just the wind. But when I woke up to find fresh claw marks on my survey markers, marks that were definitely not there the day before, I couldn't deny something was wrong. The diary became my obsession. Each night I'd read more entries by flashlight, my heart pounding as I recognized patterns matching my own experiences. But something was off. The later entries. They were changing. I know how insane that sounds, but I swear the words were different each time I read them. They started describing things that hadn't happened yet, like finding the old well behind the farmhouse, or the strange symbols carved into the trees. Things I hadn't discovered yet, but did in the following days. On the 4th day, I found the bones. I was marking the property's eastern boundary when my stake hit something that wasn't dirt or stone. 2 feet down, I uncovered human remains. Multiple sets, partially dismembered, with marks that no animal I know could make. I called the police immediately. They never arrived. My cell phone stopped working that night. The camper's battery died, even though I just charged it. And in the darkness, I saw it. A pale figure at the tree line, standing too straight, its head tilted at an impossible angle. When it moved, its limbs bent backward, like someone had reversed the footage of a person walking. That's when I finally understood what the diary really was. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't even a record. It was bait, a lure. Something that thing out there used to draw people in, to keep them here long enough to become invested, curious, trapped. The latest entry in the diary? It's describing me right now, writing this warning to you. My hands are shaking as I write this, but I have to finish. Have to tell someone what's happening. It's outside my camper again. I can hear it scratching, testing the walls. The scratching sounds almost like writing. I've tried to leave 3 times now. Each time, the roads loop back to the property. The GPS shows me miles away, but somehow I end up right back here. The property isn't abandoned, it's a trap. And that thing, the Rake, it's not just some creature. It's a keeper. A collector. This will be my last entry. Not because I want to stop writing, but because the diary is almost full. Just 1 page left after this one. And now I know why. Each victim gets a few pages, enough to draw on the next one. If you're reading this, you're already part of its pattern. Do you hear that scratching too? The missing person I was hired to find keeps calling out to me at night. The voice is his, but what's making it isn't human anymore. The thing about tracking in the Canadian wilderness is that everything leaves a trail. Every living creature marks its passage somehow. Broken twigs, scattered leaves, prints in the mud. But what I'm looking at now defies everything I know about wildlife. The tracks start as human footprints, then elongate impossibly, deepening into the frozen earth, as if whatever made them was growing with each step. The spacing between them stretches to 15 feet. Nothing moves like that. Nothing should move like that. I've been a professional hunter for 20 years, specializing in predator control and search and rescue operations. When the McNeils contacted me about their missing son, Danny, I figured it was another case of an inexperienced hiker getting lost in the backcountry. The local authorities had already conducted their standard search patterns and found nothing. The family was desperate enough to hire someone like me, someone who knows how to track what doesn't want to be found. He's an experienced outdoorsman, Mrs. McNeil had insisted, her hands trembling around her coffee mug. Danny wouldn't just disappear. Something took him. Her husband sat silent beside her, staring at old photos of their son spread across their kitchen table. I noticed they were all from before Danny moved up here 6 months ago to work as a park ranger. I took the job because the money was good and, truthfully, because something about the case nagged at me. The police reports mentioned unusual animal activity in the area. Multiple missing pets. Livestock found torn apart but barely eaten. And the cold. Rangers reported patches of inexplicable frost during the warmest parts of summer. Now, 3 days into my hunt, I'm starting to understand why the official search failed. The trail I've been following makes no sense. It circles back on itself, crosses rivers at impossible points, and sometimes just stops, only to continue hundreds of yards away with no connecting tracks. My satellite phone died yesterday, despite having a full charge. My compass spins uselessly in its case. Even my GPS unit shows me walking in straight lines when I know damn well I'm following a twisted path through the woods. The only reliable direction is the one marked by those disturbing tracks. The first real sign that I wasn't dealing with a normal predator came last night. The temperature dropped so suddenly that the water in my canteen froze solid. My breath clouded in front of me, and frost crackled across my tent's rain fly. That's when I heard it. Danny McNeil's voice, calling from the darkness.
Help. Is someone there? Please.
20 years of hunting instinct screamed at me to stay put. The voice was Danny's. I recognized it from the videos his parents showed me. But something was wrong. It echoed too much, like someone shouting into an empty oil drum. I gripped my rifle tighter and waited.
Mom? Dad? I can see the campfire. I'm so hungry.
The voice moved impossibly fast, shifting from one side of my camp to another between words. Then I saw it, just outside my tent's mesh window. A towering, skeletal figure, its skin pulled tight over elongated bones. Its head swiveled toward me, and I swear its jaw unhinged like a snake's. I fired twice through the tent wall. The creature moved faster than my eyes could track, leaving behind nothing but patches of black frost where it had stood. My fingers were numb inside my gloves, and the tent fabric had frozen brittle enough to shatter. That was 6 hours ago. I've been moving since then, trying to circle back towards civilization, but the tracks keep leading me deeper into the wilderness. The temperature drops lower with each passing hour. Twice now I've caught glimpses of the thing stalking me. Once running between trees nearly 50 feet up, and again crouched over what looked like a fresh deer carcass, its impossibly long fingers peeling frozen meat from bone. The worst part is that it's toying with me. It could have taken me last night, but instead it's hurting me. Each time I try to turn back, I find fresh tracks cutting off my escape route. The voice continues to call out, using Danny's words but twisted into something wrong.
You came to find me, didn't you? I'm right here. The hunting's so good here. You should join me.
My supplies won't last another day. My right hand is showing signs of frostbite despite my heavy gloves, and I swear the thing is getting closer. I can smell it now. A sickly sweet odor of decay mixed with the metallic tang of frozen blood. I've made peace with the fact that I probably won't make it out of these woods, but I've got my rifle, a flare gun, and enough ammunition to make sure this thing remembers me. If anyone finds this journal, tell the McNeils I'm sorry. Tell them their son was gone long before I got here. And if you're reading this because you're thinking of hunting in these woods, don't. Some predators aren't meant to be hunted. The temperature's dropping again. I can hear branches snapping nearby, and they sound like bones breaking. It's close now. Time to find out if silver bullets work on more than just werewolves. The journal ends here. The following note was added by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The above journal was found 3 weeks after veteran hunter Daniel Lopez was reported missing in Algonquin Provincial Park. Search teams reported unusually severe localized cold spots throughout the search area. No other traces of Lopez or the McNeil subject have been found. This case remains open. The old man I picked up on the reservation disappeared from my cab. Now something's crawling on my trailer at 80 miles per hour. I've been hauling freight across the Southwest for 15 years, and I know better than to pick up hitchhikers, especially on the reservation, especially at night. But when I saw that old man stumbling along Route 160 in the middle of nowhere, his ceremonial clothes torn and dirty, I broke my own rules. See, my grandfather was Navajo, and he taught me about respect for the elders. That's what the Skinwalker was counting on. The cab of my Peterbilt had been my sanctuary for most of my adult life. Name's Mike Begay, and I've logged over 1 million miles delivering everything from furniture to frozen food across the four corners. The night shift suited me. Less traffic, better pay, and the desert stars for company. Plus, my ex-wife worked days, which meant I could see my kid on weekends without seeing her. That night I was hauling electronics from Phoenix to Denver, my cab filled with the gentle hum of the engine and Johnny Cash on the radio. The moon hung low and full over the desert landscape, casting long shadows across the empty road. The nav system showed nothing but desert for miles around. No towns, no gas stations, just endless sage and sand. I first spotted him around 2 a.m., his figure illuminated by my high beams. He was wearing what looked like traditional ceremonial garb, but something was off. The clothes seemed to shift and move in ways that didn't match the wind. Still, I could see he was elderly, and out here, a few hours from help could mean death. I slowed the rig, my grandfather's voice in my head telling me it was the right thing to do. The old man's head snapped up at an unnatural angle as my brakes hissed, and for a split second, I swear his eyes reflected my headlights like an animal's. Need a ride. I called out through the passenger window, already regretting the words as they left my mouth. He shuffled toward the truck, movements jerky and uneven. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel being crushed.
Thank you, young one. The night is cold and my home is far.
His accent was thick, but something about it felt forced, like someone doing a poor imitation. The moment he climbed in, the cab temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, though it was a warm May night. The old man's clothes were caked with red dirt, and he smelled like copper and sage. Where you headed? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as we pulled back onto the empty highway. He didn't answer immediately. When I glanced over, he was staring straight ahead, his head twitching slightly.
The mountains.
He finally said, pointing toward the darkness ahead.
My people are waiting.
The CB radio crackled to life, startling us both.
Breaker 1 to 9, any units near mile marker 264. Got a broken down rig here. Could use some help.
The voice was familiar. Bobby Martin, another regular on this route. Before I could respond, my passenger started laughing. It began as a low chuckle but grew into something horrible, a sound like coyotes fighting over carrion. His head snapped toward me, neck extending further than humanly possible.
Your friend Bobby.
The thing wearing the old man's skin asked in Bobby's exact voice.
He called for help 3 hours ago.
I jerked my eyes back to the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I looked again, the passenger seat was empty. Something heavy landed on the trailer with a boom that shook the entire rig. The CB erupted with Bobby's voice again, but distorted wrong.
Pull over, Mike. Pull over and look at me. I want you to see what I really am.
Claws scraped along the side of the truck, the sound setting my teeth on edge. In my side mirror, I caught a glimpse of something impossible. A creature with too many joints, its skin shifting like oil on water, scuttling along the trailer like a monstrous spider. I grabbed the CB mic. Mayday, Mayday. This is Unit 437. I need help. The thing's face appeared outside my window, still wearing pieces of the old man's features, but wrong. Stretched and twisted. It matched my speed effortlessly at 75 miles per hour, grinning with too many teeth.
No one can hear you, Mike Begay. Just like no one heard Bobby.
The windshield exploded inward as a clawed hand punched through. I swerved hard, the truck rocking dangerously as glass rained down. The creature's arm retracted, but I could hear it scrambling across the roof. My grandfather had told me stories about skinwalkers, but he'd also taught me how to fight them. Iron hurt them. So did the words of the holy people, if you knew them. I had both. I kept an iron crowbar under my seat for emergencies. Grabbing it with one hand, I began reciting the protection prayers my grandfather had taught me, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. The creature screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and I felt its weight shift toward the back of the trailer. In the darkness ahead, I saw my chance. There was a sharp bend coming up with a steep drop off to one side. Truckers called it Dead Man's Turn. The skinwalker was on the trailer's right side, the side that would swing out over the cliff if I took the turn fast enough. I muttered one last prayer, then gunned the engine. You want to see what I really am? I shouted. Let me show you what 8 tons of steel can do. I hit the turn at full speed, feeling the trailer begin to swing. The creature screeched, trying to scramble to the other side, but physics was faster. The trailer slid, tires screaming, and I felt the impact as the skinwalker was crushed between the trailer and the cliff face. When I finally stopped about a mile down the road, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial 911. They found Bobby Martin's truck exactly where the skinwalker had said, at mile marker 264. Bobby himself was alive but incoherent, babbling about an old man who wasn't really an old man. I still drive the night shift, but never through the reservation. Some nights when the moon is full, I swear I see something running alongside my truck, just at the edge of my high beams. But I keep the iron crowbar close, and my grandfather's prayers closer. After all, in this line of work, you never know what might try to hitch a ride. The dispatch recording said animal attack. What we found was much worse. The first thing they teach you in paramedic school is to trust your gut. After 8 years on the job, I've learned that lesson well enough. But nothing in my training prepared me for that night in the Pine Barrens, when my gut wasn't just screaming at me to run. It was trying to claw its way out of my body. I was pulling a graveyard shift with my partner John when the call came in. 11:42 p.m., remote cabin off Route 539. The dispatcher's voice was tense as she relayed what little information they had.
Caller screaming, possible animal attack. Multiple victims.
Then she played us 5 seconds of the actual call. I wish I could unhear those sounds. They weren't human screams. At least, not entirely. Between the guttural howls and desperate pleas for help, there was this, chattering. Like someone rapidly clicking their teeth together, but deeper, more guttural. John and I exchanged looks. In the harsh glow of the ambulance's cabin lights, I could see he was already sweating. "Katie," he said, using my full name instead of his usual K. "Maybe we should wait for animal control on this one." I shook my head. "You heard those screams. They don't have time." The Pine Barrens at night are a different world. Our headlights carved through fog so thick it seemed to swallow the light. Skeletal pine trees loomed on either side of the narrow dirt road, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers. I'd grown up hearing the legend of the Jersey Devil. Everyone in South Jersey does, but I'd always dismissed it as campfire folklore. The GPS led us to a clearing where a rustic cabin stood, or what was left of it. The front door had been torn clean off its hinges. Deep gouges ran along the outer walls, too big to be from any bear I'd ever seen. As we pulled up, our lights caught something that made my blood run cold. Massive bird-like footprints in the mud, easily 3 feet long, with what looked like hooked claws at the ends. "Jesus Christ," John whispered, reaching for the radio. "Dispatch, we're gonna need." A scream cut through the night. Human this time, coming from inside the cabin. Training kicked in, and before John could stop me, I'd grabbed our trauma bag and was running toward the entrance, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The cabin's interior looked like a war zone. Furniture was splintered, walls were shredded, and dark liquid splattered everything. My light caught movement in the corner. A man, maybe mid-30s, pressed against the wall. His chest was a mess of deep lacerations, but he was conscious, eyes wide with terror. "We need to go," he wheezed. "It'll be back. It follows the blood." I heard John enter behind me, cursing under his breath. Together, we quickly assessed the victim. Multiple deep lacerations, possible punctured lung, but stable enough to move. As we were preparing to transfer him to a backboard, an ungodly shriek split the air. It came from directly above us. The ceiling exploded inward in a shower of wood and insulation. Through the hole, I caught glimpses of something massive. Leathery wings, a horse-like head with too many teeth, claws that looked like curved daggers. The Jersey Devil wasn't just real. It was right there, and it was nothing like the cartoonish descriptions from local legend. John shoved me toward the door. "Run. Get him to the rig." We half-carried, half-dragged our patient through the undergrowth. Behind us, I heard John fire off the flare gun we kept for emergencies, followed by an enraged screech. The thing burst from the cabin's roof, silhouetted against the moon. Its wingspan had to be at least 15 feet. And we made it to the ambulance, but the keys were still in John's pocket. And John was now somewhere behind us, buying us time. I could hear him crashing through the woods, shouting and firing off another flare. The creature's attention snapped toward the sound, and it dove into the trees after him. "No, no, no," I muttered, trying to think. The patient was deteriorating fast, leaving a trail of blood that gleamed black in the moonlight. I pulled him into the back of the ambulance and started gathering supplies. We needed pressure bandages, trauma dressings. That's when I heard it. John's voice, calling from the woods.
Katie, help, I'm hurt.
I froze. Something wasn't right about the voice. It sounded like John, but the cadence was off, like someone learning to speak by mimicking sounds.
Katie, please. It's got me.
The patient grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Don't, he whispered. It does that. Makes you hear what it wants you to hear. Another cry came from a completely different direction.
Katie, over here.
The same wrong cadence, the same artificial quality. Then another call from yet another direction. The thing was trying to confuse us, draw us out. I heard heavy wings beating the air above the ambulance. Claws scraped against the metal roof. We were trapped, and it knew it. It was toying with us. Then I remembered something from my wilderness training. Large predators hate fire. I still had a fresh trauma pack with an emergency flare. If I could just... A massive talon punched through the roof like it was tin foil. The patient screamed. I grabbed the flare gun, loaded it, and aimed at the hole in the roof. The next time those claws came down, I pulled the trigger. The shriek that followed was deafening. The creature thrashed on the roof, its wings beating frantically. I heard it take off, crashing through the treetops. Minutes later, John found us. He was scraped up and had a nasty gash on his arm, but he was alive. We got the patient stabilized and transported him to the nearest trauma center, breaking about a dozen speed limits in the process. The official report listed it as a bear attack. The patient backed up this story. I guess the truth would have earned him a psych consult. John and I never spoke about what really happened that night, but we both requested a transfer out of that district the next day. I still work as a paramedic, but in a busy urban district now, where the worst I deal with are drunk college kids and weekend accidents. John took a desk job with dispatch. We don't talk about that night, but every month he texts me the same thing. A link to local missing persons reports from the Pine Barrens area. There's always at least one. Always involves someone who reportedly heard cries for help in the woods. Something took my wife during a storm on our honeymoon. The islanders won't help me search after sunset. The screeching still haunts me. Even now, months later, I wake up in cold sweats hearing that sound. Like metal being torn apart, but somehow organic, alive. The locals called it the Ahool's cry. I called it the sound that took Savannah away from me. We were supposed to be celebrating our love. That's what honeymoons are for, right? Savannah had found this hidden gem on some travel blog. A small resort on an unnamed Indonesian island, promising pristine beaches and authentic cultural experiences. The price seemed too good to be true. But we were young and drunk on romance. We didn't ask questions. The first 3 days were perfect. We snorkeled in crystal clear waters, ate fresh seafood caught by local fishermen, and made love under the stars. Savannah kept saying how she'd struck gold finding this place. I remember her exact words on our last normal evening. Sometimes the best things in life are secrets waiting to be discovered. If only she knew how darkly prophetic those words would become. The storm hit on our fourth night. Not just any storm. This was biblical. The kind that makes you wonder if some ancient god is throwing a tantrum. We were in our beach bungalow when the power went out. Savannah wanted to check on our rental boat. She was always the responsible one. "Just 5 minutes," she said, kissing me quickly. "I need to make sure the ropes are secure." 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20. When I finally went to look for her, the rain was coming down in sheets so thick I could barely see 3 feet ahead. I found our boat secure, but no Savannah. Just her flashlight floating in a puddle, still turned on. The resort staff were useless. The storm had cut off communications with the mainland, and they seemed more concerned about keeping the other guests calm than helping me search. But there was something else in their eyes when I mentioned Savannah had disappeared. Fear. Not the normal concern you'd expect, but deep, ancestral terror. It was old man Rake who finally told me the truth. I found him huddled in the resort's kitchen, nursing a bottle of local spirit. His English was broken, but his story was clear enough. The island had a history. A dark one. Long before tourists and resorts, it was home to a temple dedicated to something called the Ahool. Not quite god, not quite demon, but something in between. A massive, bat-like creature that the islanders would offer sacrifices to in exchange for fertility blessings. But the gods, they must be respected. Rake slurred, his rummy eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Cannot take without giving. The ritual. It went wrong. Many died. We abandoned the old ways, built new things, tried to forget. But the Ahool, it never forgets, never forgives. I thought he was drunk, spinning folk tales to a worried husband. But then I heard it, that screech. It cut through the storm like a blade, making every hair on my body stand on end. Rake dropped his bottle, shattering it. It hunts, he whispered. Always at night. Takes them to the caves below the old temple. You want fine wife? That where you go. But be warned, something's worse than not knowing. I should have waited for help. Should have waited for the storm to pass. But Savannah was out there, and if there was even a chance. I grabbed supplies from the kitchen. Flashlights, water, a knife. And made Rake draw me a map to the temple. The path was treacherous, muddy from the rain and overgrown from years of neglect. I slipped twice, the second time almost falling into a ravine. The temple itself was little more than ruins, but even in decay, it was magnificent. Massive stone bats decorated the walls, their eyes seeming to follow me as I moved. The entrance to the caves was behind the main altar. A gaping maw in the earth that seemed to breathe in the storm's wind. As I stood there, considering my options, I found the first sign of Savannah. Her wedding ring, glinting in my flashlight beam, next to fresh claw marks in the mud. The marks were huge, bigger than any bat I'd ever heard of. That's when I heard the screech again, closer this time. Much closer. I had found where the Ahool takes its prey. Now I just had to decide. Was I ready to become prey myself to save my wife? That's when I heard Savannah's voice echoing up from the darkness below. She was singing our wedding song. But something wasn't quite right about the sound. And there you have it. 6 chilling tales of cryptids that remind us why some legends are better left undisturbed. But what do you think? Are these just stories? Or could these creatures be lurking closer than we think? Let me know in the comments which encounter haunted you the most. If you enjoyed these tales of terror, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more spine-chilling stories, and hit the bell icon so you never miss what's lurking in the dark. This is Bon, signing off. But remember, the next time you hear something rustling in the shadows, maybe don't stick around to find out. Stay safe out there.